Howdy friends. I'm starting to like actually sitting up here. I know I get really animated when I stand up and sometimes I get out of the picture. This actually grounds me a little bit, so I kind of like being here. At any rate, it is Monday. It is October 28th, 2013. And today, you notice I'm actually starting to put headings on my videos a little bit more through the use of my board. Yes, on Friday was expectations lead to action, so I called it expectations. Okay. Today I'm calling it the Plankeye Problem, and you'll see what I mean when I get further into my discussion, but I do want to highlight some of the points of discussion that we had today in class, because I know that with all of the reading that we've been doing, with all of the substitutes, actually really only one, Mr. Shermer, who does a really great job when I'm not here, shout out to him. But with all of that, we haven't really gotten the chance to discuss a ton, and really this book is starting to get pretty involved. We're starting to see some metaphors coming into play, some symbols coming into play that really all revolve around this central conflict that we have in this book, which is that Sal is trying to come to terms and get some closure on her mom leaving the family. And wrapped up in that entire conflict is all the subplots with, you know, Dad kind of seeming like he wants to move into a relationship with Margaret Cadaver, and how Sal is treating all of them in this. But there's also this subplot of Phoebe going on as well. And so with all of this stuff kind of taking place at the same time, I felt like it was a good idea to just reel it back in and analyze it a little bit, because we are with Sal on this journey. And part of where she stopped was the Pipestone National Park. And she was part of a ceremonial pipe smoking with her grandparents and a whole bunch of other people, a whole host of other people. And as she was participating in the ritual, which they call a remembering ritual, she was thinking about her mother, and as she blew out the smoke, she said, "Sal, there goes your mother." Which is a pretty powerful metaphor, because what's she trying to do? She's trying to let go of this anger and this hurt and all of this stuff that's attached to her mom leaving the family. And it's interesting to us, it creates a conflict in our own heads if we're attempting to connect to the character, because, you see, what we're seeing here is she's going out there in hopes of bringing mom back, and yet at the same time she's got to understand that Dad's trying to move on over here, Mom's trying to move on over here, Sal's trying to move on over here, and everybody seems to be moving in a different direction. So she has to be prepared for the possibility that Mom's not going to come back with them, and that she is going to need to get on with her life. And it's tough. This is why I said in class to you, don't ever let anybody tell you that you're a kid, you don't have any real problems. No, yes you do. Life is hard for you too. Oh sure, you don't have to worry about putting food on the table or keeping the lights on or any of that stuff. But life is still not easy for you. And this is the type of conflict that if we put ourselves in the position where we say, gosh, I'm trying to balance my own desires and my own selfishness in a way that I want to be happy, and I'm trying to also marry the fact that I want my dad to be happy and I want my mom to be happy, but I want them to be happy together, and they're not anymore. And this is very difficult. It's a tricky balancing act, and it's why a lot of problems kind of pop up in people's lives, is because it's difficult to come to terms with that type of conflict. So that was something that we talked about in the very beginning, about what is selfish in that case, and kind of how do we operate when we're trying to let something go and yet it means so much to us that we want to keep it in. That's a conflict that we want to keep our eye on as good readers and maybe make some predictions about. There were also 3 spots that I stopped in to have some lengthy discussions with you guys that you guys were right on point with and you guys were participating in, so it lets me know that you're doing a great job connecting with the story, and I'll read a couple of them. Okay, this first one, it's Sal talking about how Dad is kind of 2 different people right now. He seems to be really sad and missing Mom when he's at home, but then when he goes over to Margaret Cadaver's, he's happy, he's laughing, he's even holding hands with her a little bit, and it makes Sal kind of angry. And we stopped, again, to talk about this notion of what is selfish. Because she wants Dad to be happy, that's absolutely a fact. But she only kind of wants him to be happy the way that she wants him to be happy. And that's selfish. I mean, it gets into this area where we're going to start talking about how things aren't really right or wrong in the world. There's not really any clear right or wrong answer. A lot of what we've been talking about has been situational. Well, she thinks this because of this. Well, this is right because of this, but this is wrong because of this. See, in life, you're going to have to work through all of these things, which is why I'm glad that we're practicing it as good readers. This next thing I pointed out to you is this notion that Phoebe and her mom have this relationship right now where Phoebe just has no clue about where her mom is, emotionally speaking. Sal can see it directly. As a matter of fact, we'll get to it in just a moment. Your afterburn was about that today. Sal can look very clearly at the situation between Phoebe and her mom and say, something's not right here. Phoebe's mom is really depressed, and there's something wrong. And Phoebe's like, no, she loves doing stuff for us. She loves... What? But Sal comes up with an interesting point. She says, maybe Phoebe didn't want to notice. Maybe it was too frightening. And then she said, had I been like that with my mother? And this brought up another interesting point, because we don't get a lot of insight into Sal's problem with her mother. We get a ton into Phoebe. Well, that makes me say, as a good reader, hey, I remember at the beginning of the story that Sal said beneath Phoebe's story was another one. My own. So I, as a good reader, look at that and I say, I need to be analyzing Phoebe's story in order to find out about Sal's story. Hopefully this is starting to make sense to you. It's all one big picture. Remember, go back to that character, plot, conflict, theme, main idea drawing. That'll let you know just how tied together all of these things are, and the subplots are really what support it. We're talking about a subplot, just like we're talking about sub-zero, or sub-flooring, or submarine. It's always underneath. Well, when something is underneath something else, it's supporting it, right? Subplots support the plot in the story. One last thing that we talked about in class that I want to get you back on thinking about is that this notion of Mrs. Winterbottom doing all these physical things because she's being neglected emotionally and intellectually by her family, she's trying to hang on to some sense of usefulness, of being useful in some way, shape, or form to her family. Because if one is not useful, or let's say if something isn't useful, it tends to be thrown away, or cast aside, or discarded. Is it possible that that might be something that Sal's mom was feeling? I don't know, but a good reader asks themselves those questions. So we got to the end of this chapter, and then I brought up this afterburn, where we talk about this thing that Sal is noticing. It says, this is a quote from Sal, I wondered why it was so easy for me to see that Phoebe's mother was worried and miserable, but Phoebe couldn't see it, or if she could, she was ignoring it. That's on page 88 in the old version. I believe it's on page 86 in the new version. Don't quote me on that, though. And I asked the questions, and this is kind of a lengthy fire journal entry, so you probably have closer to 10 or 15 sentences for this one, but I asked these 4 questions. Why is it so easy for us to see flaws in others, but not in ourselves? Why might Phoebe be ignoring her mother's feelings? What can we learn about Sal's mother from Phoebe's mother? And then I asked you to predict what's going to happen in Phoebe's story. Again, because a good reader looks at Phoebe's story and says, if I can figure that out, I can figure out Sal's. Well, one last thing that I want to leave you with, and it gets back to this whole, the Plankeye problem that I wrote on the board. And he said, the Plankeye problem? What is Plankeye? Well, in the Bible, and this is certainly not me preaching to you, but this is a really great story for exactly what we're talking about, and I happen to be familiar with the stories of the Bible, so I'm going to pass them on to you. Know that this is not me pushing my religion in any way. This is actually just kind of a really good story for analyzing the situation that Sal is in right now. Now, the story goes, or it's actually more of a question that was posed to Jesus that said, okay, Jesus, you're telling lots of people how they should be living their life and this and that and yada, yada, yada. Well, what's to say that any of us are living the right way? And how are we supposed to tell other people that they're not living the right way when we're not living the right way? He says, I'm glad you asked that question. I'm paraphrasing, by the way. This is not the Bible. And nor do I purport to be a Bible scholar, but the story remains pretty strong. He says, how do you take a speck of sawdust out of your brother's eye if all the while there's a great plank in your own? A plank meaning like a 2x4 is what he's talking about. He's saying, you're so nitpicky in someone else's business. How are you supposed to help them fix their tiny little problem when you've got this gaping, humongous problem in your own eye? And he said, and they say, I don't know. How could you possibly do it? He said, take the plank out of your own eye first, dum-dum. He didn't call them dum-dums. He wouldn't have done that. But it's logical to us, and yet sometimes we don't see it because our logic is clouded. And I'm more calling myself a dum-dum because we try to do that all the time. Have you ever heard somebody say, do as I say, not as I do? Well, that means I'm not willing to follow my own advice, but you should follow my advice. Well, why would I do that? This person's got a Plankeye problem. They're trying to help me by nitpicking in my life or helping me with one little thing in mine when they got a humongous problem. They've got a plank sticking out of their own eye. Listen, I'll help myself, okay? If that's what happened to your eye following your advice, I'm going to take care of myself. It's this notion that it's very easy for us to take a look at somebody else and say what they're doing wrong, and yet never bother to flip the mirror on ourselves and say, how can I be better? What can I be doing better? How can I improve? And remember, your best is good enough for today, but you better be striving to improve. Your best better be better tomorrow. That's the crux of the Plankeye problem. I can't help anybody if I'm not taking care of myself. Stuff to think about. I'll see you tomorrow, guys.